Don't let the last 2 videos on this channel trick you. I am not content with the state of this game. At first I was really happy because my biggest dooms and glooms from when I thought it would be dead on arrival were not as bad as I thought. But then the honeymoon phase passed by and I did realize that there are some huge problems here and the game is extremely lacking. Both from the perspective of this being a Project Moon game and the gacha game. Before that, I have to give out some positives. The visuals are good, the music is good, the performance isn't bad, big surprise considering the RAM usage of Library of Arena. The gacha rates could have been way worse. 3% for the SSR is what's commonly used in other gacha. Prices are the same as other gachas too. The gameplay is relatively enjoyable even if it suffers from normal battles not having enough control over some aspects and abnormal battles being just Arena light. I will go into detail on this later because there is a problem attached to it. Chapter 1 is pretty good and a good way to hook you into the entire world of Project Moon. Chapter 3, in general, is great in all aspects. More importantly, in the story department, Chapter 3 is pretty good. Limbus' story is doing well so far and I'm hopeful for it delivering on what's being set up. But that's where my positives for the game end now. There's always room for them to expand. First off, let's get some minor stuff out of the way. The Chinese are gone, no Chinese translation. This is negative because it just removes a huge part of your market. But this also means no review bombing, unlike what happened with Library of Arena. But since they were the only ones that actually gave Project Moon any slack, this would mean that the update for the finale in Arena would have gone without any pushbacks, even if the methods they used were not justifiable and really cringe. It did end up giving us some necessary changes that add more to the story and tone and generally made things better. The game doesn't have a login bonus. This would be literally the only gacha I've ever seen to not have any type of login bonus. The only incentive to log in daily is to do daily battle pass missions, which do keep you more engaged. But after your 20th day of doing daily missions, you might start to feel burnt out. Especially when one of the missions requires you to do an entire dungeon to suppress an abno. Daily login bonuses are used in other gachas as a way of you still opening the game and being engaged, even if you don't feel like playing. Because it at least guarantees that in the future, if there's something that would interest a certain player, they won't feel like a huge gap exists to catch up. And hey, while you're at it, you get some good rewards. Ranging from materials all the way to coins to put the big slot machine. In Limbus, this doesn't exist. The only thing that you get is half a tier for Battle Pass, which means nothing when you can farm those same tiers in the mirror dungeon infinitely. Well, maybe I'm too harsh with it. We do get some sort of daily login bonuses. That being, daily apologies on Twitter. We've literally had almost one every day for week 1. For a gacha game, this is a horrible pity system. The amount of shards you need to get a pity is way too much. Also, the pity shards being character specific hurts it even more. You cannot get a pity unless you have it for a specific character, so unless you are lucky and have been getting the shards for said character, you could end up simply never reaching the amount needed to get said pity. A good way that they added to counteract that is by having the shards for the pity reformable. You can get 24 to 74 shards weekly, but those are random shards. If you're ready to go with the option where you can choose which character you want, you can get up to 15 to 45 weekly, which is a good thing. That said, sadly not good enough. This game works with Battle Pass seasons. The reason why I bring this up is because at the end of the season, half your ego shards get converted into threads. So you have 11 weeks to actually farm for them. That means you will need a minimum of 37 shards weekly if you want to get your pity. And due to it ranging from 15 to 45, if you even get 1 week where you're unlucky and get, let's say, 20, then you won't be able to reach it. Half your shards will turn into threads at the end of the season, and you will have to keep going with them taking away half your progress. When you reach that point, the only alternative for you is to roll the gacha, which also has a factor of luck added to it, but if you simply don't roll the character you need. That will mean you don't get the ego shards you need for them either, which results in you still missing out. There goes the currency you saved up for, or worse, there goes 10 bucks you worked for. Sadly, that's just a problem for gachas at large, but here it's worse due to how valuable the ego shards are. Which makes it even worse when you point out that ego shards are also used to create threads. Threads are used to rank up characters you already have and make them better in every way, boost their skills and give them new skills. Ranking up your characters is without a doubt the most important factor in combat and can easily change the tide. By even ranking up one of your characters, you can turn a struggling battle into a fair match. The only way to get threads are from thread chests you get through the battle pass or converting ego shards into threads, which makes saving up even harder when you might need to use them to level up characters you already have. Credit where credit is due, they are adding a way to daily farm threads. That said, this should not have been a problem to begin with. Making the currency used to get a pity this valuable and also be used to rank up characters makes actually managing those resources harder and much more jarring. That's why in my opinion, this system is just flat out bad. Mirror dungeons kinda suck. They are adding way more incentive for you to do them weekly and reduce the amount of time you would need to farm it, But that doesn't change the fact that they can feel like a drag, especially when one fuck up could mean the end of your run, reducing the amount of rewards you get and using up one of your 3 chances to get the max amount of rewards. And when it becomes the only current way to get lunacy, then it just ends up becoming a burden, and might end up being really easy to roll out on, especially when we have to wait till June for a new rendition of it. Also, I think it's currently intended for you to do them daily, due to you getting one free go for you to go explore the dungeon every day, which ends up becoming a problem when they already drag on, and especially when you don't have your weekly bonus active. The only real reason you would go in there is to get tiers for your battle pass experience, identity experience, and level up tickets, with the last 2 actually being removed from the rewards. So then what's the point of doing them? Only battle pass tiers? It just feels like it's gonna end up burning you out faster. Moving on. The combat suffers from one huge flaw, like I mentioned earlier. That being that the way it's centered around clashes makes it really easy for it to just snowball into you simply being unlucky. Get a bad first turn or first couple of turns and you can go from having your sanity reduced all the way to members of your party being staggered or just dead. The only way to bring you back from this point is if you were lucky with the way your Candy Crush was lined up for you to get an ego. Either way, it's hard to get a comeback when it's just dependent on how lucky you are flipping a coin. Especially when it turns out that the coin is actually weighted, because the second you take account of your sanity, your rolls get affected. The only time you have an actual coin flip, so 50-50 odds, are when you and the enemy have the same amount of sanity. If someone has higher sanity, they have higher odds of getting hits. But the contrary is also true. If you have lower sanity, so starting from below 0, you get a lower chance of rolling hits, which can go all the way into a 30-70 chance. Which at that point, it's not even funny how dependent it is that you don't fuck up once, because one slip up and it all snowballs in an instant. So when this review recommends to use defense die to move up the next attack, you better pray that the next character you line them up with actually gets good RNG, or that whoever is attacking the same character doesn't make their sanity drop or stagger them. Because from that point on, the only way to turn the tide is to get your ego for clashes, so it ends up becoming a race of lining up pretty colors for you to get even a slimmer of a chance to turn it back. Or alternatively, you can go and grind. If you were to reach this point in the story normally without grinding once, your character should be at level 16. Now, let's see what the recommended level for this fight is. That's weird, but from this review, it's telling me that only people who refuse to learn the game need to grind. Gee, I wonder if the case of people grinding could be because there's a recommended level right next to the big fight that they get stuck at. Anyhow, I went on a little rant there. I just want to simply say that this review being the second review you find for most helpful over Sunbeam is super disingenuous. In the end, you will be forced to grind or simply get lucky. Want to be able to beat a tough fight? Better hope you got lucky with the rolls you got. Because if that gacha character you maxed out happens to be the one that loses this fight, then you're gonna have to go back and get your other characters to a higher rank or higher level. And how you do that? Grinding. There's simply no way around it. It doesn't fall onto being a skill issue, it's just dependent on luck. Luck on who you rolled in the gacha, luck on if you win a clash, luck on if the character you got is good for this fight. When you end up reaching the wall of you simply being unlucky, then the only alternative you have is grinding. It reminds me that Rena also had a leveling system, which they removed due to it simply not being a good mechanic. And I agree, because in Rena you could always switch out your build and play around with other cards, so you have a chance to troubleshoot difficult fights and see what worked best. But for Limbus, that's not a possibility. Or well, it is, for the right price. Next! As I did mention, the game has way better performance. On PC, on phone it has varying results. However, oh my god, they don't have testers. These bugs are fucking tremendously bad. And before someone points it out, wow, yeah, you're right. Project Moon games are pretty buggy. Rena, in most updates, had bugs ranging from visual glitches to just breaking your game. That is all an exemption from criticism, especially when those bugs were at least fixed in a day. There are, from what I remember, 2 extreme cases where it took longer to fix. We are currently on day 5 and there are still 3 separate bugs that brick your game. Enter the first dungeon or Japanese locale and you will get yourself bricked. Even if you try continuing your phone, you still won't be able to finish the first chapter of the game. In other words, it simply bricks your entire account. If you play on any time format that isn't HamHamPangPang on chapter 3's dungeon, you will have your camera zoomed in and put outside of the map. In other words, you can't continue, so you're bricked. You can try continuing on your phone to varying results. Last one that bricks your game is if you beat a chapter during the daily reset, you will be met with a black screen and you will be able to progress. What type of spaghetti code is at play where you're having your computer not put on AM/PM makes you unable to play the game? What happens to people from Japan who have the Japanese locale? Are they just not allowed to play? Why can't I play the game during this hour? And these bugs still have not been fixed even 5 days after release. These are the types of bugs that would easily kill any game. And it not being fixed after 5 days is fucking stupid. And there's still other bugs. Some mechanics just don't work. For example, Chapter 3's final boss just doesn't work. Their passives never activates. Visual bugs like Heathcliff coming on your screen. Another example is some people getting duplicate mail, which is the reason why they delay the reward, because they are investigating how to fix it. Also, I heard that paralysis just didn't fucking work. These are the most notable bugs that haven't been fixed after 5 days. The bugs that they were literally forced to fix as fast as possible are even worse. Transactions would just shut down the game and items would just not be sent to users. Or how about merging accounts from Steam to phone would delete the entire account. How these were even bugs that were able to fly under the radar is fucking baffling to me. Thank God that these got fixed. But for the bugs that just break your game, they still haven't been addressed. And it's really surprising to me that they even exist, since this game got delayed for a reason, so I would expect that they would at least have less bugs. It scares you to think what bugs could have even existed before this delay. Imagine if the game actually released on its intended release date. Those are all the non-story related problems I have with the game. From the perspective of it being just a Project Moon game and from the perspective of it being a gacha game, I think these are still fundamental flaws. Before we move on, spoilers for the story, so chapter 1, 2 and 3. Chapter 2 is a mess. The tone is extremely off-putting. It's Project Moon trying to introduce a bit more comedy, and for that I commend them. But my god, it should have just been all comedy instead of trying to balance comedy with a serious tone. The theme of chapter 2 is them going to a casino, which, with my expectations of other Project Moon games where taking a train causes you agony and torture for eons, I was expecting this to have the same tone. Or at least have focus on how horrible casinos actually are. Not whatever the fuck this is. But whatever, that comes down to me just simply not vibing with it. What I think is just an issue of not finding the right tone is that during the scene at the poker table, it tries to go into a more sinister mood when the crew boss robot gets crushed to death. Where Sonia ends up asking Rodion if she wants to follow in his footsteps and go down the route he took, which then leads into the cast going through a vent and crashing into their meeting in a comedic fashion. Simply put, it feels forced. These goofs really pull away from the point it's trying to present. The underlying tone of the entire chapter is that this casino is rigged so much against anyone who steps into it, by regulating the entire place so much that it turns into a scam, and making any poor souls that falls into this trap have to work their debt through manual labor, which, honestly speaking, is kind of a pretty expected way to handle why casino is evil. Kaiji did it. But when the point you try to drive home is put in between parts where Don does a funny or Sinclair has a quirky CG of him playing the maracas, it kind of makes the point it tries to drive end up missing the mark. Because what people will be focused on is the little character moments, not the casino at large. This type of comedic tone would have been way better to introduce in a side event, because in the end, they can't decide if they want you to take the chapter seriously and set up stuff for the future, while showing off how sinister the world is they live in, or if you should take it as the cast just having fun. A big flaw from the perspective of this being a Project Moon game is that, due to the gacha format of storytelling that's being used here, they're extremely limited on ways to letting it flow. Like most gachas, Limbus is set up the same way, where there's a scene or two of setting up the story, and if it's a story episode then you're lucky and maybe get the third scene. Afterwards, the next scene has them introduce a threat or end with a threat being introduced. They then either defeat the threat and move on to find a different one, or they have to deal with the reinforcements that they called in. This leads to a scene in the middle of combat where they might drop some quick words to explain their situation or what they plan to do, followed then by more random threats to encounter. You repeat the format from the first step till you reach the boss you want to set up for that chapter, or you entering the dungeon. This type of storytelling is a sad reality we have to deal with of this game following this format. More importantly, this also means that any characters that want to be set up have to appear in front of the cast so that the player knows what they're up to, because you can't have it detach its point of view from Dante follow any character outside of the main cast, which was one of the things Project Moon did best and had some of their best work with in Rena. And you can tell they do suffer from this format of storytelling. In the first chapter, there's a stage where you get introduced to Yuri, She gives info about herself and she lays down a bit of foundation of what's going to happen. This scene ends by just randomly going to a fight with some random thugs. Nothing implied this would happen and it just randomly happens. Other times they have to use an excuse of we gotta feed Mephisto, or they're blocking our path, or the good old they keep coming. So it's really jarring for you to randomly just go into combat. To their credit, this only happened once from what I noticed, but it's pretty telling on how they are being restricted by this format. Another example I can give is that with this format, they are forced to pad the chapter with just battles that are kinda pointless. 211 and 214 are just combat. They're here to fill up space basically. If you remove them, nothing would change. Or how about 27, where Ryoshi throws a knife at the chandelier, making it drop on nobody. And then she says it was all a performance. And then you fight the same people you're already fighting. If that doesn't constitute filler, then I don't know what can, putting it bluntly. This one is more of a nitpick, and it comes from the perspective of having played Rina, but I feel like 3-7 could have been a fight against Siegfried, even if it's a forced loss, since that's something that they showed off that can happen in the prologue. And integrating story into the gameplay is one of Project Moon's strengths, and it would have also been something different compared to fighting the same two enemies for like 4 stages. Which leads me to saying that, so far, they haven't really been able to show off their strength of integrating story into gameplay. The only time we kinda had a glimpse of it was during the forced loss in the prologue and the final boss of chapter 2. Until it just ends up being you fighting the same enemy 4 waves and you realize that they aren't actually gonna use their strengths here. A good examples of times where they use the story and gameplay integration is literally any fucking realization in Labyrinth Arena or any core suppression in Lawali Corporation. This is mostly nitpick and it still can happen, but I feel like it's something worth mentioning because we still haven't seen it yet, and I do hope we see something like this in the future. That's the story spoilers out of the way. Now let's get to the final and probably my biggest problem. Schedule. This schedule is bad. I really can't put any other way around it except for this is kinda bad. An event a month is fucking horrible for a gacha, and counting new units as content is flat out disrespectful if you compare it to Arena. Yes, in Labyrinth Arena, for big updates there used to be month-long breaks, I understand, but for weekly updates we actually got pretty decent batch of content. An entire new fight with a story to drive forward the plot, new enemies to play around with, and new passives and cards to experiment new builds with, and to redefine whole strategies were pretty big additions. So going from that example to very small updates like just adding new identities is pretty jarring, especially when they are technically put behind the slot machine. And having the actual main story be only progressed every 3 months feels very off. Again, like with all of stuff I've said here, that is just the sad reality of this game being a gacha game. Which, if you can't tell by now, I'm not happy with that. The chapters being split into 3 parts also feel off, since they will either need to stop the chapter at weird times, or make up for it by making the length of the chapters longer than what they actually are. Otherwise, you stopping 1/3 of the way there is gonna feel really disorientating when you have to go back to it in a week. Yes, Arena updates were also weekly and sometimes even longer, but when the fights released, they were most of the time self-contained. So while they may have had a cliffhanger at the end or they were setting up stuff for later, they were still pretty rounded out for that story and that scene. Decently slow pace of new content being added, alongside having content that is pretty repetitive, can burn you out quickly, and just simply not having all of it is gonna make the wait feel worse. Guess this is where Project Moon takes its inspiration from Naruto and Fate Go. Limbus company, to say the least, could have been much, much worse. Thankfully, it didn't reach the extreme low that I was expecting. But I think that's still extremely flawed. And setting aside these flaws as just little quirks or just being completely blind to it is not gonna help anybody. The amount of backlash they used to get may have been harsh, but without it, some issues would have just stayed the same way they were, and some good additions might have never happened, like I mentioned before. Project Moon, I do genuinely believe, are competent when they are aware of stuff that needs fixing. Like, they are changing stuff. For example, they are fixing a lot of bugs right now, like the Heathcliff comm and the chapter 3 passive just not working. There weren't any mentions of the bugs that break your game, but I did test one out and it seemed to be fixed, but I can't say for sure if all those breaking bugs were fixed. These bugs should have been fixed day 1 or day 2. It taking an entire week to get these bugs fixed is kinda bad when they will completely stop all of your progress. Some other stuff they are working on is fixing the pity system, by now making nominal chest infinitely grindable in the mirror dungeon, so it ends up giving an incentive to it, which is a good thing. But at the same time, I feel like this will end up enforcing the point that the mirror dungeon itself is the bigger problem. I'm on like day 11 of doing daily mirror dungeons and I'm really starting to feel it drag on. So when that becomes the only way to farm for stuff you actually want, it can feel like a huge struggle and a hassle that's just not worth it. Also, not to mention that it's a grind for something extremely valuable that, due to being a gacha, is time blocked because of the module stamina requirement. That said, it shouldn't be a huge problem if you've been playing the Limbus endgame. And last big thing I want to mention is their plans to have changes to the combat, which some parts have been revealed and I feel like it does fix some stuff, but at the same time makes some problems more prominent. For example, putting a bigger incentive on matching colors will make you more likely to hyperfixate on that strategy, simply because it's just better now because it boosts the power of your attacks and also because they help you unlock your ego faster. I want to just flat out say this, but I feel like the easiest fix to all of the combat issues is just to let you redirect any fight. I feel like even adding a little button that's called manager view or something to let you redirect in any fight would fix the issue of having to deal with most of the fights getting out of your control. It also feels like this is something they actually want to do, when all the boss fights so far have been redirectable. I really don't understand why they haven't just pulled the trigger at this point. I guess to not be too close to Arena, but with how similar it already is, it won't hurt to add the good parts of the game to this too. But for some other problems with the game, they are just fundamental issues that either come with it being a gacha, would require an intense amount of work, or just complete change how everything works to fix. And simply put, that's not realistic. I do hope it gets better, because underneath some of the issues is some passion put into it. We've known for a while that it was the director's dream to make a gacha, but without even having to mention the negatives that come with it, like trying to find some way for people to spend money on the game and get sunk into it financially, it is just simply flawed. It may eventually get to a more stable position, but in my opinion, I just don't see it surpassing their previous works. Let's just hope that their future works make up for it, and let's hope that Limbus becomes a game where everybody's happy with it. That's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.